a minute to review who all is with us today. If you get a chance and scroll through the chat, welcome to new folks if this is your first time attending. And then let's real quick do, I did make some updates to the agenda. I hope that folks were able to check those out and everything looked good. So we're going to dive in here in a minute to a presentation from Elizabeth from the City of Lawrence. And we're going to do a couple presentations with Independence Inc., the ARC, and SAC, and hopefully have a nice discussion after those. And then we're going to get an update on Unite Us, and as much as we have time, any announcements that folks have, I do want to open up time for that if we have time, but I think we've got a lot on our agenda. So if, unless there's any questions about our agenda, I'm gonna go ahead and Elizabeth, you should be able, the screen share should be open to all of our presenters today. So if you want to dive in and get going, we can do that.
All right, thank you. All right, my name is Elizabeth Hafoka, and I work for the City of Lawrence. I was asked to present some information today to you all about the city's anti-discrimination ordinance, the Lawrence Human Relations Commission, and some information on past employment discrimination cases and how our ordinance protects folks in our community from discrimination in employment. So the Lawrence Human Relations Commission comprises 9 members from diverse racial, ethnic, commercial, industrial, and various other segments of the community. The Human Relations Commission works to eliminate discrimination in employment, public accommodations, and housing by accepting, investigating, ruling upon, and resolving complaints within the city limits of Lawrence. The commission also works to study discrimination and other matters that may have an adverse impact on human relations in our community. And the commission's work supports the promotion of goodwill and collaboration across the spectrum of all the people of Lawrence. The commission is authorized to solicit and receive funding for programs and then to advise and support staff and the city commission. So chapter 10 is the chapter in the city code that is the anti-discrimination ordinance. It establishes the Human Relations Commission and describes their powers and duties. It also establishes the director of the Human Relations Commission and describes the director's powers and duties. It lays out the process for filing and investigating a discrimination complaint. And then it also describes the unlawful acts that are prohibited by the ordinance. And those unlawful acts in the areas of employment, housing, as well as public accommodations. Chapter 10 establishes an affirmative action program and also a domestic partnership. The protected classes for the City of Lawrence are race, sex, religion, color, national origin, age, ancestry, sexual orientation, disability, gender identity, and then familial status in housing only. These are a bit more expansive than the areas that are protected federally, but there are other agencies that are more broad than this and has additional protected classes that we don't have. We were one of the first cities to include gender identity as one of our protected classes. The 9 commissioners currently are Chair Amber Sellers, Katie Barnett, Sarah Bloxam, Kay Emerson, Joseph Falls, Christina Haswood, Marcus Logan, Jennifer Sheldon Sherman, and Caleb Stevens. The current director of the Human Relations Commission is the city attorney, Tony Wheeler. And then the staff liaison is the city's director of equity and inclusion, Dr. Faris Mohammed. And the investigators are me. I'm the supervising city prosecutor, and Lauren Summers, who is the other city prosecutor. The process for filing a complaint would begin with connecting to our office. That can be done online by going to the city's webpage, and we have an intake form that can be submitted for employment, for housing, and for public accommodations. And you could also contact us by phone, 832-3310, or come in person. We are located at 1 Riverfront Plaza, Suite 310. That is the same area as the municipal court building, and we are in the city prosecutor's office. In addition to individuals contacting us directly, we have a relationship from HUD. And if a person contacts HUD regarding housing discrimination, HUD will notify us that there has been a complaint filed in our jurisdiction. And so we would take on that investigation, and that particular complaint would be dual filed at the local level and also at the federal level, and that's just for housing. So at intake, we would determine whether we have jurisdiction to accept the complaint and do the investigation. And that involves a determination as to whether the individual has standing. They must meet the definition of an aggrieved person that is defined in our ordinance. Also, the complaint must be timely for employment and public accommodation complaints. They must be filed within 90 days of the last discriminatory act. And for housing, that time deadline is within 1 year of the last discriminatory act. There must be jurisdiction over the respondent. For employment, it means it's defined as any person in the city employing 4 or more employees who are not members of one's immediate family. A person acting directly or indirectly for any employer, labor organizations, non-sectarian organizations, organizations engaged in social service work, all political subdivisions of the city, state, and federal governments. If an agency is a nonprofit, fraternal, or social association or corporation, they are exempt from our ordinance. In addition to the respondent jurisdiction for employment, there must be subject matter jurisdiction, and that just means does our ordinance specifically state that a particular practice is unlawful? And so we would just look at the language of the ordinance and the facts of the allegation and decide whether if the complaint as alleged were true, would it violate a provision of the code? And then if we meet all of those elements, then we would go ahead and accept the complaint for investigation. So Chapter 10 lays out the unlawful acts as they pertain to employment discrimination. If an employer on the basis of a protected class refuses to hire or employ someone, bars or discharges a person from employment based on protected class, treats a person differently as far as compensation or terms, conditions, or privileges of employment, excludes from membership in a labor organization, promotes or disseminates a discriminatory advertisement or publication, refuses to refer for employment, or any discriminatory practice in an apprenticeship or training program. Also, the ordinance prohibits an employer from refusing to grant a reasonable accommodation as it relates to disability. It makes retaliation for promoting Chapter 10 or the filing of a discriminatory complaint also unlawful. It is unlawful to aid, abet, incite, coerce, compel, or attempt to discriminate. Also unlawful is subjecting a person to a genetic screening or a test, the condition of employment. There is a provision in our code that says that it is okay to fill vacancies in employment on the basis of one of the protected classes if the reason is to eliminate or reduce an imbalance. So that would not be unlawful to do that. The investigation is done by neutral investigators that do not represent either the respondent or the complainant. We do explain to both parties that they may seek legal representation, or they may not seek legal representation. It's totally up to them whether they want to be represented by an attorney, but we are acting as neutral investigators and do not represent either party. What we do is interview the complainant and the respondent. We interview other witnesses that may have knowledge of a particular practice or any relevant information pertinent to the allegations. We would request and obtain and review relevant documents to the investigation. Sometimes we do on-site visits or on-site assessments. And then once we have completed our investigation, we prepare a final investigative report, and that is submitted to our executive director for review. The executive director reviews that final investigative report and then makes a determination as to whether the evidence supports a finding of no probable cause or probable cause. If the executive director determines there should be further investigation or has outstanding questions, she could come back to the investigator and ask us to do additional investigation to make sure that we've covered everything for an appropriate determination. If there is a no probable cause finding by the director, then the complaint is closed. And if there is a probable cause finding, then the complaint would go to mandatory conciliation, which I'll explain what conciliation is in a little bit. And if the parties aren't able to agree, if there's no successful conciliation, then the case would go to public hearing in front of the commissioners, the human relations commissioners. In a housing discrimination complaint, either party may elect to go to district court if there's been a probable cause finding. That's only true for housing discrimination complaints. So there is a provision for conciliation laid out in Chapter 10, and conciliation, similar to mediation, is an agreement of the parties and subject to approval by the director. It resolves the complaint. The discussions and anything that happens in the conciliation are confidential, so they cannot be used later at a hearing if the case should go to hearing. Although if there is an agreement reached, that conciliation agreement would be open to the public. It would not be confidential unless that was required to protect a victim, perhaps in a sexual harassment case or something like that. Conciliation can start at the beginning of when the complaint is filed and go on through the entire investigation. We have been working lately with a local conciliator here, and she has started conciliating sort of at the beginning and then gone through all the way until the case is finished. And sometimes that's predetermination, sometimes that's post-determination, and that's if all parties agree to participate. And then, like I said before, if there's a probable cause finding, the Chapter 10 requires parties to participate in the conciliation, and if that fails, then the case moves on to hearing. So at the public hearing, an attorney would be appointed by the city manager to conduct the hearing. There would be witness testimony presented and other evidence to the human relations commissioners. The same rules of evidence apply as in any courtroom proceeding. And then after the hearing is complete, the human relations commissioners would issue an order of finding. And that order, as well as the conciliation agreements, sometimes include these types of relief, but it could include monetary relief like actual damages or punitive damages, injunctive relief, maybe the restoration of employment or position. The relief can also include public interest provisions, training for the respondent or employees, an advertisement that they do not participate in discrimination employment. And relief can also include a civil penalty of up to $10,000 for the first offense, $25,000 if it's the second offense, within 5 years, and up to $50,000 if it's the third offense within 7 years. So I was also asked to provide information on the amount of cases that we've had for employment discrimination. And I've been here since August of 2011. So the information that I had went back to April of 2012. And since that time, we have received 9 employment discrimination complaints. And the breakdown is there. As you can see, there were 2 in 2012, 1 based on race, 1 disability, 3 in 2013, 1 on race, 1 on sex, and 1 gender identity. And then we received a race employment discrimination complaint in 2016, and employment discrimination complaints alleging disability discrimination in 17, 1 for race in 18, and 1 based on sex in 2019. We haven't had any this year or last year for employment. And the outcomes of those cases are that 2 were referred to the Kansas Human Rights Commission due to conflicts of interest. The Kansas Human Rights Commission is the state agency that does investigations involving employment, public accommodations, and housing allegations. So if we have a conflict of interest that prevents either me or the other investigator from doing the investigation, then we refer them on. 1 was administratively closed because we could not get a hold of the complainant. There's lack of cooperation there. 1 was withdrawn by the complainant because they reached an agreement outside of our conciliation process and outside of the Human Relations Division. And as part of that agreement, the complainant withdrew it. And then 5 were investigated, and all of the determinations were no probable cause. The Human Relations Commission has monthly meetings. They are the second Monday of the month at 6 p.m. via Zoom. You can watch those on the city's YouTube channel. You may also provide public comment via Zoom. We just need to follow the process to register for those meetings. We do have one upcoming on Monday, the 14th, so I invite anyone interested to join in those meetings. That's all I have. Are there any questions?
I had a couple to start, and I'd ask folks if you have questions. We do have 6 minutes until our next agenda item. Drop them in the chat if possible. But Elizabeth, do you know how many? Well, first question, based on the order of your slides, if somebody did want to file a housing claim with HUD, do you have that link, or can you provide some resources of how to access that in a streamlined way?
Yeah, if someone wants to file a complaint with HUD, they would just go to the HUD website. Okay. And just follow the instructions to file the complaint. I can get that link and maybe drop it in the chat or send you an email if you wanted to share that to make it more accessible. But I would say if they want to file a complaint with HUD and it alleges housing discrimination that happened in the city of Lawrence, they could just go through us because we will dual file it. And that way they could contact us directly. If there was some sort of conflict of interest, we might refer that to HUD if we could not do the investigation. But if it happens in the city limits of Lawrence, then that person could contact our office for housing discrimination complaints as well, and they would not have to contact HUD.
So along the lines of housing, and I know you attended the Housing Stabilization Collaborative meeting recently, which is super helpful. How many claims do you get for housing?
More than employment. I don't have those numbers. I apologize. I was specifically asked to focus on the employment numbers.
No worries.
We do get significantly more. I think I would say that I've done about between 40 and 50. I think I've received complaints in the last 10 years. So you know, what I say, 9 of them were employment. I would say maybe less than 5 were public accommodations, and the rest of those would have been housing. So a lot more housing. We get a fair amount of cases regarding reasonable accommodation denials. So that means if a person has a disability and needs an accommodation from their landlord's policy in order to use and enjoy their dwelling, if they make that request, the landlord then denies that request, they could file a complaint with us. And that's the majority of the type of cases that we see in our office.
That's helpful. Yeah, I think that's helpful. And I think that might be worth some ongoing discussion with maybe some of our other groups, because I think that, yeah, this is a great resource. And one other question I had, and then I do have one that was in the one that's been dropped in the chat. You talked about one of the exemptions on nonprofits are exempt. Is there, do you know why that is for employment?
I don't know the reason. I'd have to go back and look probably at the legislative history for why that exemption was done. That would have been done by the commission that originally passed the ordinance, or if that was added as an amendment later. My guess is someone representing that particular type of group asked for that exemption and to be declared exempt from the ordinance, maybe because they're private, and I guess the commission felt like that was an important exemption to have.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay, well, how does one of the questions in the chat was, how do you publicize your work and that the opportunities to make a complaint? Have you done any awareness campaigns or considered it recently, especially when it sounds like, you know, the housing?
Yeah, so I think that with COVID last year, there were some changes, but the Human Relations Commission does do outreach and sort of gets the information out that way. They used to attend there was like an Earth Day celebration they went to. There was a festival of cultures they participated in. We had a fair housing poster contest in the schools. There were some other outreach things that they have done. I don't typically do the outreach. I have given training to the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority. I've given training to, I think, the Landlord Association. So I've done training for people, but I don't necessarily go to those types of events. We save those for the executive director and the commissioners. But I think last year with COVID, some of that was altered, and I think they're just waiting for things to get picked back up to be able to spread the word. I believe they've done CLEs too, continuing legal educations, and sort of try to get the information out that way.
Well, that's helpful. I want to be mindful of time, and there's my timer to keep us on time. So Elizabeth, would you drop your email in the chat, or if you had it on the screen too, maybe, but if folks have follow-up questions, I think Elizabeth's open to you emailing her. And I really am grateful for you coming. I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to take what you presented and consider it in some of the work that this group has done around the anti-poverty plan, which I know I've shared with you. And again, really grateful that you attended that housing stabilization collaborative work group last week as well. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to pass it off now to Angie and Stephanie to take it to our next conversation, our next presentation, and some questions afterwards, focusing on people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities. Ladies, it is all yours.
Well, wonderful. I will jump in first, and then I'll introduce the other ladies. My name is Angie Reinking, and I am with the ARC of Douglas County. And if you haven't heard of us, it's because we're small, but we have been in Lawrence since 1956. This is our 61st year, or 65th year rather, providing social services in Douglas County. And I just can't resist doing like a 1 minute what the ARC is, since I have you all here. And again, the ARC, historically, we are a local chapter of the ARC of the US. Historically, people often get stuck on our name. Is it an acronym? Is it ARC? We are the ARC now. Once upon a time, historically, ARC used some antiquated language that's now offensive to people to describe their work. The Association for the R word citizens. So that's long ago changed, but the branding was so strong that we've kept the ARC nationally, and we are a local chapter of the ARC of, and so we are called the ARC of Douglas County. We're not the only ARC of Douglas County in the US. So if you go Googling us, make sure you find the one in Lawrence, Kansas, not in Colorado, or I can't remember what the other state is. But we have always worked as an advocacy organization and to meet the needs that were unmet in any other way in our community, which means what we've done has changed drastically over time. When the ARC started in 1956, it was specifically started by parents of individuals with developmental disabilities who had no education option for their children. They were not being allowed in the school district, and there was no place to be educated. So originally the ARC was a school. We haven't been a school for many decades, but again, just knowing that where we focus our efforts has changed over time based on what the needs are that no one else is addressing that we can manage. That said, the ARC is a targeted case management agency in addition to doing our advocacy. So quickly, the things you could call us for would be, someone with an intellectual or developmental disability who's looking for a targeted case manager, or you can shorten that to case manager. And we serve Lawrence, we serve Douglas County, we serve several counties around here. So call us if you're in need of that service. We also just do advocacy. We are committed to that broader vision of a community of acceptance. And that what we see is, again, you'll see the same thing from Steph and the other ladies, is that the barriers for people with disabilities aren't that they have a disability, it's that our society has built these barriers. And our goal is to continually work on systems and advocacy that allows for system change and improved accessibility for everyone in our communities. So with that, I have the honor and privilege of also being the administrator for the Self-Advocate Coalition of Kansas. I used to work there many years ago and came back as the ED here for the ARC and SAC. And Stephanie Sanford and our self-advocates are going to talk a bit about what SAC does and the importance of accessibility and how we address that and how we might be able to be a resource to any of you here in the community. So I'll turn it over to you all. Steph and everybody.
There, we're unmuted. That usually is not my problem, as everyone is laughing. I'm going to talk just a little bit, and then I'm going to really hand it over to the folks who really know what's going on. Who you see in the background, the pink shirt, is Kelly Smith. She is our plain language specialist. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because I think we could be of service to every single person on this call in terms of increasing your ability to reach more people. And so I'll dangle that carrot out for right now, and that'll be Kelly. And then Kathy Lobb.
I am the IDG and aging specialist for the South Advocates Coalition of Kansas. That's just a new world that I just came into this year.
And what's really cool about that is that when you discuss with the aging services and with folks who work with the aging population, very little interaction with folks with IDD. And yet we know that everyone who ages and who has an intellectual or developmental disability also has unique and sometimes complicated ways to get in touch with things. And yet Kathy is going to be that bridge and help folks see what we can do as our population ages. But basically, it's kind of hard to tell you what we do because there's very little that we won't do. And I know that makes Angie cringe, but just to give you an example, I got a call the other day. She called the ARC of Douglas County. I gave her a lot of information. And then I said, well, I can really send you to someone who can get something done right now. And I said, let me hook you up with the Kansas Disability Rights Center. And there was just a terrible pause on the phone. She said, well, that would be good, but I'm in Colorado. And she had called the ARC of Douglas County in Colorado. But yet all of the information and technical support we gave her was still relevant. And so that when I say there's not much we don't do, that's what I mean. We work with self-advocates across the state of Kansas.
We also do a conference every year. We've been doing it virtually the last couple of years. And we even get people from out of state that contacts us and wants to be part of that.
Yeah, we had some really good things came out of COVID for us. When we went to a virtual conference, we were used to having about 250 participants in our conference from Kansas. We'd get the occasional visitor from Missouri or Nebraska. Or Iowa. You're right, our friends. And I mean, not that everybody isn't our friend, but with our conference this year, we were able to reach we had 342 people registered, but not only from Kansas, we had 12 states represented. And to be able for our community to be able to reach out and engage across the United States, you know, really, and be supported in that has really opened up our avenues of being able to advocate and to engage and collaborate with other organizations that have the same issues.
Well, and we also belong to a lot of community groups throughout the state, and they're done by Zoom.
Mm-hmm. I will give a plug right now. We have planned July 7th or July 24th at Holcomb Park, an ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act celebration picnic. And there will be more details about that later, but my gosh, we'd love to have everyone there because it is going to be a blast, I promise. Now I'm going to turn this over to Kelly, because I mentioned that carrot earlier about being able to help you reach maybe some folks that you haven't reached. And this is what we mean by access. If you can't understand what's presented to you, then that information is useless.
You might have to help me.
And there you go, Kelly.
You might have to help me a little bit.
I will.
Well, I went to court and the word commanded, I thought I was in trouble and I was going to be put in jail. Can you help me with that?
Yes. So Kelly and Elizabeth, your PowerPoint really, it made the same point, and it's the legal system uses language that is not plain. And I get that. But when she received, it was a summons to appear as testimony. And when she read the language, you are commanded to appear. And then that language was not clear.
I thought I was going to go to jail. And Stephanie goes, you just need to be there. And I said, why didn't they just say that?
Yeah, you need to be there. And I explained that legally that may not have carried the same weight. However, I think if you guys can look at your promotional material, and I bet it all looks really good and it sounds really good.
But if self-advocates cannot understand that it's not going to be very well taken.
You're going to miss not only, and I'm going to, this is beyond self-advocates.
Yeah.
This is people with brain injuries. Okay. This is people who English is their second language. These are folks in the deaf community who have their own form of communication, but when we use proper English, sometimes they are lost. And so, and also for folks who don't have the advantage of an education. You know, there are a lot of populations that don't work on a very high elevated academic level. And
5th grader words.
Yeah.
You wanted to explain that a little more.
But the natural standard is 4th grade and above language. And we would go even farther to say that it's more than that, because it's a matter of how you present the information. It's a matter of the language that you use, but it's also a matter of how you frame that language that makes a difference and will make it readable and understandable.
And also too, if you are a person with an intellectual and developmental disability and your parents were told to send you to another school out of state,
Yeah.
So that
when they finally passed it, it was too late for me because I was sent to I went to school in Nebraska. Basically, it's because they couldn't provide special ed for me here in Kansas.
Yeah, and I
And
might
I
just
think-
jump in here because I just wanted to highlight that we hadn't really called out, which to us is so obvious, we almost forget to say it, that we're all about people with disabilities and all people living the life of their choosing and in the community of their choosing. And very few people say, gosh, I hope I can live in a house with 6 people I didn't get to choose, or I hope I get to live in an institutional setting with very little limits on my rights. So just to know that SAC is an advocacy and really a civil rights organization, and I'm just going to tout them a bit because they're not great at tooting their own horn. They are so well respected statewide. So we are constantly, we can't even keep up because Zoom can just schedule on top of Zoom on top of Zoom. All the committees and statewide groups that we are part of, we used to just travel to Topeka back and forth every day. And now I don't know how we'll get stuff done when we actually can't be at our desks too, but that they are respected and that we have worked hard. SAC has been around over 20 years for people to realize this concept, which is nothing about me without me, that comes from the independent living movement, but applies really well for all of us as we think about how we do our work. When you have someone at the table with the disability, and then I'll let Kathy go, and then you get a different input, you get different information. But when we try to do it and we don't include our fellow Kansans with the intellectual and developmental disabilities in the planning or the implementation or the discussions, we miss out on their perspective. That's what SAC's all about.
And the other thing I was going to say is I have worked for SAC for 20 some years, and I'm proud of it, but also too, one of these days is going to be where I'm not going to be able to work anymore. But the thing of it is I own my own place here in Lawrence. I own my own townhouse.
So I'm gonna let me highlight Kathy's story just a little bit, because Kathy and I are roughly the same age. Okay, keep that in mind. I went to grade school. I caused a lot of problems in school.
No.
I went to public education. I went through high school, got an opportunity to go to college, screwed up a lot of things in my life. And here I sit. Kathy is the same age in a different part of the state. Her life trajectory took a very different way because it's hard for parents. Okay, let me just recognize that. It's very hard for parents to understand the capabilities sometimes of people who they've been told have no future. I was very lucky in having a mother whose parents supported her being blind to understand that anyone is capable. Kathy's parents were told something and they believed that they were doing the best thing that they possibly could. And when I entered 2nd grade, Kathy was sent to live in another place, another town, all with people with disabilities.
160 miles.
160 miles away from home, and could come home on holidays. And you stayed there until you graduated, didn't you?
18.
She stayed there until she was 18 years old. I just want to remind you, Kathy and I are the same age. Okay.
And I will just say that telling our stories is a lot of what SAC does, and they do a great job. SAC, she testified at the legislature for decades, and there's nothing more powerful than someone saying to a legislator, this was my reality. This is why services and funding for community-based services and continuing to support people to live in their own homes in the community is so important. And then we fast forward to as Kathy was saying, what all do you own and have in your life? Your own home?
Yeah.
The other thing I've been advocating for 20-some years is for people to hire a person with an intellectual and developmental
go.
disability at the state level. They finally did it this year. They finally did hire somebody at the state level.
So maybe we'll make that same challenge to all of you. Whether or not you reach out and hire someone with an intellectual and developmental disability, please don't feel free. Please don't be afraid to contact us and see what maybe we could do to help broaden your services to include everyone.
Yeah, and with that, I know we wanted to allow some time for questions because we don't want to just talk at you, hoping that if there's some ways we could be helpful to you all during this call, feel free to reach out or to speak up or however Jill wants it done.
Yeah, well, I do see one question in the chat, and I would encourage other folks. We've got a couple minutes until our next our shift to the next item, but does SAC help filling out disability paperwork is the first question.
That's not their primary thing, but if somebody has no other resources, we'll step up and do just about anything to help somebody. That said, we have some good referrals and would make sure and connect people with the ombudsman volunteers and do that follow-up. We end up getting the calls that are really the people that have fallen through every other crack often, or if it's an individual call. And Steph gets all kinds of technical assistance calls from across the state and the country about various issues folks are facing and dealing with.
Great. And you kind of touched on this in the comments that you shared, but if there's, Steve had a great question, Steve Ozark posed, what needs or gaps do you face that we can share with the community? What are, you know, if you could pick one or two big ones that we can share out, what would those be?
The intersectionality of poverty and disability would be what I'd say number one, because poverty impacts everyone with a disability in different ways, but realizing when we talk about poverty and all that anti-poverty work, that people with disabilities are represented at least 1 in 4 in our country, and that we often overlook the opportunity to include accessibility and the unique supports that people might need along the way because of poverty, you know, because of their disability as part of our response to poverty. And then secondly, I should let Steph and them talk. I'll make myself stop.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, I think the second one would be transportation. I mean, there's lots, but for us, the T-lift I was here in Lawrence when there was no T-lift. We love the T-lift, but I will tell you that there is such a demand that those two ladies sitting there, half the time they can't come to work when they're supposed to because there's not a ride available at that time. And they're calling a week before, or they have to reschedule, or you know what? Some of us have social lives and something comes up and you want to go to something. If you didn't know that 5 days in advance, your chance of getting a ride to go do something fun or emergent in this town with the T-lift is pretty limited. And so we are always pushing locally along with statewide initiatives and efforts to say, how do we increase accessibility of our, we're thrilled we have it, but there are limitations still on the access to accessible transportation for folks. And housing is right there with it, but that's part of poverty, so.
And the other thing, I was kicked out of therapy because the bus could not get me there. So, yeah.
And I just want to add one thing. I would challenge everyone to rethink things you hear, rethink things you may believe or understand to be true about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because the stereotypes and the myths are what hold us back. And I would be happy to introduce you to 100 people who will myth bust all of that. So just keep an open mind. That's all we're asking.
And the other thing I would like to say is if anybody feels like they need to know more information, please come by our office. We're in the Douglas County Human Services building at 2518 Ridge Court.
Or they can call.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, I think we could spend like the rest of this meeting and then maybe tack an hour on talking with you ladies. And I think we're gonna come back, so stay with us because we're gonna have that facilitated conversation here in a few minutes and come back to opening up to ideas around how we can be better around some of the things that you identified in your presentation. But I wanna hand it off also to for our next speaker, to Rachel with Independence Inc. And Rachel, I'm gonna pull up your slide deck. And unless you wanna drive, you can drive or I can drive, it's up to you. Okay, you
Either
just
way.
tell me when it's time to move through and you go ahead and introduce yourself and get going.
Okay, so I'm Rachel Vogelmeirer. I am an independent living skills and peer counseling specialist at Independence Inc. here in Lawrence. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of what Independence Inc. is, just in case you don't know. So we work with individuals with disabilities, and our whole mission is just to encourage people to live independently, whatever that means. Some people, it can mean living similarly to a neurodivergent individual, or you know what I mean. But it's different for everybody, and so we just kind of give tools and encouragement. Our whole goal is to go out of business because we don't want anybody to need our services. So we can move on to the next. So we do independent living skills training, peer support, advocacy, transportation, equipment loan services, and then transition services, FMS payroll for HCBS services, and some other things. So we can keep going. So the mission is maximizing the independence of people with disabilities through advocacy, peer support, training, transportation, community education. So we serve Jefferson, Douglas, and Franklin counties. Individuals must have a disability to receive our services. We don't require proof, but that is just a standard that we have for grants and stuff. And services are completely free except for transportation. And then we can keep going. So we have 5 core services, which are typical for CILS, the Center for Independent Living. So we have the independent living skills, peer support, advocacy, transition, information, and referral. And so I'll break down each of those as we continue on, but some of the additional services that we provide: transportation, equipment loan services. We do the work program across the state of Kansas, and then we do community education, technical assistance, and accessible housing. And keep going. So with independent living skills, it's pretty broad. It depends on what individuals are in need of. So some people need help with figuring out how to hire somebody for in-home care, or maybe need help with resume writing or cover letters or just finding employment. So we do that. I've worked with some people who just have a hard time getting motivated to clean their dishes. So I'll just go and help them figure out ways of finding a schedule or just sitting with them while they do it to offer moral support. And so it's pretty broad in general. It's really dependent on what the individual person needs. And then I put the link at the bottom for that specific thing, and I can send out this PowerPoint too with all the links and stuff afterwards. But we can keep going. So we have 3 peer support groups operating right now, and they're all virtual, which is not ideal for most people, but we have a conversational group, which we just tell stories or just talk about our days, offer emotional support. And we have people, it's on Zoom, but we have people that will just call on while they're on the bus home from work or while they're just sitting at home. And then we have music therapy, which is the second Monday of the month. And it's run by a board facilitated music therapist who's local, Emily Bockert. And so she plays games and we create songs, and there's no musical talent or instruments or even participation required. She makes it really accessible for everybody. She likes to meet with people to get the taste of their music and their interests. So she kind of molds each session to who is participating, so everybody feels seen and heard. And then we have art therapy, and it is facilitated by Kristen Anderson, who is an intern from Emporia. And we try to make this, again, open and broad. So we have an activity that people can do, but you can also just sit and talk, or you can do a coloring page. And we actually provide all of the art supplies for this. So I personally will deliver art supplies to people, and it includes sketchbooks, markers, colored pencils, paint, tape, glue, a whole bunch of stuff for free. And so we just require that you sign an intake with us to receive services, and then free to join. And it's for all ages. So we have individuals as young as 14 and then as old as 70. So it's pretty broad. And eventually, as we keep going, we'll add more groups. We've had cooking class in the past, or movie club. We've gotten requests for creative writing classes or technology classes. So this will kind of start snowballing once our pandemic comes to an end, if it does, and we move forward to an open building. We can keep going. So this is just one of the activities that we did over Zoom with, we created mandalas. So this is just an example. Yep, advocacy. So we teach self-advocacy as much as possible. So we want people to advocate for themselves, both in employment, housing, personal life, just setting boundaries with people. We do services revolving around Social Security. So we help people apply for Social Security. We help with Medicaid applications. We can help with any kind of application. If we were to get people who want to get voc rehab services, we'll help them submit a referral there. We advocate for service animals in housing and business, a lot of emotional support animals, especially during the pandemic. We try to improve accessibility community-wide. We provide info about civil rights, like the ADA, Fair Housing Act, Landlord and Tenant Act, and all of that. So we help with a lot of Social Security stuff. And then we can keep going. And then our transportation is the only thing that we charge for. And so you have to call to schedule a ride at least 24 hours prior to when you need a ride. It's first come, first serve. We have 5 accessible vehicles that can handle all sorts of equipment. So wheelchairs, walkers, all of that. We can get you from work, home, school, recreation, medical appointments, door to door. It's throughout Douglas County, but we do offer medical rides to Topeka, Kansas City, and Leavenworth. If you are riding in town, each way is $3, and then Douglas County, it's $5, and then out of town medical is a $30 fee. We do have punch cards. So if you call that number at the top, the 785-843-5576, you can sign up with us and schedule a ride. We try to make it as easy and painless as possible. Rides go from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but our last ride is at 4, just because we gotta wrap it up sometime. And then next slide. I think we went backwards, unless I duplicated a slide. There we go. So the equipment loan bank, it's free, no cost to the public. We get donations every single day from people around the community. We have things from manual wheelchairs to walkers or platforms, crutches, rollators, toilet seat risers, benches, briefs, depends, liners, canes, reachers. We have a whole bunch of stuff. We actually had to move it out of this room that's pictured into another room because we had so much that was donated just recently. We accept quality or new or gently used equipment that can be sanitized. We don't accept anything that's falling apart or is damaged in any way, just because for liability reasons, we don't want people to be hurt. Equipment must be clean and in proper working condition. It's always best to call first and ask if we accept things, because if we have too many crutches, we have nowhere to store them, we'll end up just having to throw them away, which we obviously don't want. So if you call first, we will refer you to other banks if need be. And then next slide. So some additional services, transition services is one of our core services. So we do deinstitutionalization through Medicaid providers. So if an individual is in a nursing home and they want to live in the community once again in their own apartment, we'll help with the process of finding an apartment, finding a place to live, making sure that in-home care attendants are scheduled if that's a need. We also, through funding from Medicaid, we will purchase furniture and other household items to, again, aid with successful independent living. We do diversion assistance to individuals at risk for entering institutions. And then we also do youth transition. So if an individual between the ages of 14 and 24 are looking to become independent, either through independent living or just seeking employment, or if they're college bound, we help with that too. And one of our staff members, Daniel Brown, does the Kansas Telecommunications Access Program, or TAP. So they will provide specialized equipment to individuals in Kansas with disabilities to give them access to basic home telecommunication services. So we have a whole bunch of phones that have all sorts of different capabilities. We have screen readers, a whole bunch of stuff. And then we have FMS, the Financial Management Services. And I see we're running low on time, so I'll hurry up. But we pay in-home care attendants through the Kansas Medicaid HCBS waiver program. And then we have Braille services where we can create Braille labels and stuff like that. And then next slide. I think we're getting to the end. Yep, that's it. So I'll put my contact information in the chat. And then I
Hey,
see.
Rachel, there was one question on the previous slide, which was, do you refer them anywhere once they've transitioned?
So Medicaid has to contact us in order to start the transition services. So I'll get a call from someone at Aetna or Sunflower, and they'll tell us everything that we need to know. It really depends. Sometimes we're really involved with the individual and we can set up supports after they've transitioned, and other times they just want us to buy them stuff for their house. So it kind of varies. But after they've transitioned, we will refer them to like Just Food for food resources, or there was an individual who needed HCBS services, so we referred them to JAAA to help get that set up. And so it depends. Sometimes it's really hands-on, sometimes they just want to live alone. So yeah, hope that answers that question.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I'll take your slide deck and I'll email it out to everybody after, along with the recording. But thank you. I think that's every time I spend time hearing about what you all do, I learn something new. So thank you. All right. Well, I think let's move into some, well, before we move into that, Rachel, and I know Jill's on as well, but in terms of what are some of the gaps that Independence Inc. sees to kind of lead us into the facilitated conversation, the conversation I want to have with the group and the time that we have left on the agenda.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
What kind of gaps from your vantage point at Independence Inc., what do you see in the community for folks that experience a disability or access issues?
I think one of the things that we've noticed recently, at least within the past week, it's been at least 3 people. They were talking about bus stops and how the bus stops keep moving, or there are some places that are in the grass. And so people have to either find like a concrete slab to board a bus if they have a physical disability, or are in a wheelchair or anything like that. And so that would be a barrier that I think in the community. But other than that, I feel like a lot of people have a pretty good grasp on the different agencies in the community, which I think is really good, especially in Lawrence specifically, not just Douglas County, but I know there are a lot of people who are in contact with multiple agencies and are able to know where to go next, which I think is good.
Okay.
This is Norm from DCF, Norm White. And I just wanted, one of the things that Independent City's done historically is also supported community efforts, had an access task force. And one of those areas is faith communities, for instance, and other informal groups in the community are not necessarily covered by the ADA. And people with disabilities accessing participation in their faith community, going to the faith community, which is not covered by the ADA, being able to participate in worship and community life is often a very important one for people and their families. And that's one that over the last 4 or 5 years, that Faith Access Task Force has made some major inroads in relationship building with churches. And some of our faith communities have a day a year to invite a person with a disability to come in and share. And every faith community has people who participate. But I think one of the really historical, powerful outreaches of Indie Inc. is that they've also moved some of those community efforts beyond what just, and I'm not just Indie Inc., but all of the services that Indie Inc. Provides in the community. So we've always been appreciative of that support as well.
All right, well, I realized I should have asked you this in advance, Daniel, but would you be willing to facilitate some discussion amongst the group? And I'm gonna bring up just the agenda, and I'm gonna take some notes here just on the agenda to keep track of conversation, but would you mind kicking us off? Any things that you're thinking about, Daniel?
Sure, I can kick us off. Obviously, I haven't prepared for this at all, but the issue of bus stops came up, and that is something I can go ahead and share and give some of my 2 cents, because I have a lot of experience with bus stops. I've worked with our local transit department a whole bunch through this community challenge grant that we got with the AARP. I've talked about bus stops endlessly over the past year, and it is an issue for sure. I'm pretty confident that our transit department in Lawrence is aware of the issue and is hopefully going to remedy it. But it is definitely true. There's situations, there's bus stops where, yeah, it's just, there's not even a concrete slab, which is the ADA minimum requirement. So I am hopeful that is an issue where there will be positive progress, where we not only will we see the bare minimum concrete slab, but we might also see some stuff above the bare minimum. But I do think it's interesting. I mean, for all of us, I think hearing all of these conversations about how individuals with all these varied experiences, might have different barriers to accessing services. To me, it's really like an introspective process of thinking about the things I do. The communication that I put out is the language I'm using accessible. I think a lot about non-English language, but as far as like plain language, that's not something that I necessarily think about every day. So I think if anybody's going to share as far as the discussion, I think some of that sharing might just be sort of thinking about the ways in which we all might do a little bit better. So obviously I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but if anybody does have any ideas or any questions about how, I mean, for me, I think, I don't necessarily know how to improve that language. So if anybody has any questions for like easy ways that they might do a better job in their day-to-day tasks, I think that's a good starting point.
Well, maybe that's a question for Stephanie or Angie. Is there would there be maybe a training that you guys could do for a group of, I know there's a PIO group that Daniel and Carrie Britt, our communications officer with the county, are on. The people that do the communication and honestly do really important communication because they've been doing it on the pandemic these last few months. So would there be maybe a workshop that you could do, or I'm sure you do them already?
Well, SAC does all kinds of trainings and would be happy to jump in and do a training specifically if it's for like local agencies around plain language. And I guess I'd make the plug because I think sometimes we miss the concept that it's not just that plain language is going to benefit a person with a cognitive disability, right? It benefits all of us. And I know Steph made that point, but I always think of it as being universally more understandable for everyone. And we all benefit when we understand information that we're trying to take in. But I'll let Steph jump in.
Yeah, SAC, we also can offer technical assistance if you have questions. Say you have a brochure right now. And in fact, we're working with one with the state right now, looking at plain language and how you can make it very clear and understandable. If you have publications, brochures, outreach material that you would like us to look over and make suggestions for plain language, we are available for that as well. But we'd be happy to come in, and what we can do is we can really individualize those trainings to specific organizations and make them, more than just listening to concepts, but seeing how those concepts play out in their business.
Yeah, and the other thing that makes me cringe is the word workshop.
Yeah. Okay. And Kelly mentioned we would like to prefer not using the word workshop, and here is why. In the IDD community, and there are exceptions. Actually, there are federal exceptions to paying people minimum wage. And one of those exceptions is called a 14C certificate, where you are allowed to pay someone for their rate of performance as opposed to their time. And those are generally called sheltered workshops. SAC is pretty clear about the fact that we believe that people's work is, it's a civil rights issue for us in terms of paying fairly. And workshops refer to the ability to pay people sub-minimum wage. And so if we could, this is just our plug, and we do this, we're pretty adamant about it. If we could stop using the word workshop, and perhaps a training session, presentation, learning experience, they're all the same. Learning sessions. We just like to ask that maybe we be respectful of that and the self-advocates. And that's just that's just a matter of learning, the historic culture, the historic trauma that has been involved in all of this. And it's like the R word. We've eliminated that, I hope.
We have, but still being used.
Yeah.
Well, and oh, I just lost my thought. Never mind. Just flew away.
I do want to tag on to the transportation though. Here's the issue with most of the folks that I know and my friends who use accessible transportation. It stops at 4, and I am not criticizing anything with this. I'm just suggesting that there are folks who would like to go out to a bar at 7 o'clock at night, and there is not one accessible transportation vehicle that can take them and pick them up, even if they called 6 weeks in advance. There's no door-to-door accessible transportation on the weekends. And so all of our transportation is arranged around services. And people are not services, they are humans. And in advocating with us, we are advocating for full inclusion in the community. And that means at night and on the weekends. So just a plug that as we look to really work on inclusion, we got to make it available so that everybody can be included. And right now, there's a whole group of people that can't be.
Rachel has a question.
Excuse me, this is Norm White from DCF again. I just want to jump in on that. Excuse me, just 1 second.
Okay.
And that is, people with disabilities also like to participate in faith communities, which occur on Sunday, and some other activities. While it wouldn't be specifically focused on faith communities, it really would help with social isolation and increase the right of choice. Excuse me for the interruption again.
That's okay. Rachel, go ahead. You'd raised your hand.
Yes. So actually going off of both of those points, I know I haven't been here very long at Independence Inc., but I know in the past we had gotten a ton of requests for after hours rides or weekend rides for like church and stuff like that. And so we moved money around and we got all this stuff sorted out. And then we had maybe 2 people that scheduled a ride. And so it just became a lot of our drivers just sitting around waiting for people. And it wasn't as utilized as we thought it would be. Because like people want that option, but it doesn't always work out that way. Maybe you're too tired or, you know, pandemic happens and you can't make it to church. And so it, at least for us, it wasn't feasible, but I don't know if another agency would be able to, or the city, I don't know, but just throwing that out there.
Any other?
Don't forget to remind everybody that right now the city is doing their rerouting assessment, and this is a great time to make your voices heard in regards to what kind of changes you'd like to see with the city's transportation. And I know that evenings and weekends are part of that conversation. And so there are listening sessions happening as well as a survey that people can fill out. So go do that too.
That's what I was going to say. Megan, you beat me to it.
So one of the things that came to my mind, Angie, when you talked about the intersection with poverty, and you know, forgive me if this is just how my brain works. Then the issue of workshop, not using the workshop term, and it traditionally refers to minimum wage. So, you know, there's a hangover existing and from the past about how individuals with disabilities and are compensated, and talked about, you know, referrals for jobs previously, you know, so how do we make some meaningful, I was thinking of making some meaningful connections to the jobs work area for starters of the existing anti-poverty plan, which I'm working to organize a meeting here very soon. But what other ways or who needs to be involved in that work?
If what your goal is to make sure that people with disabilities voices are heard, people with disabilities need to be at the table.
Okay.
So they can speak to their experience in this town of you know, so again, whether that's inviting a SAC representative or, you know, someone who's willing to join committees. Again, when we're at the table, we don't get forgotten, or, you know, it doesn't get overlooked, and no one's ever intending, obviously, typically to be difficult or to not include folks. But if you don't have that perspective or that lens that you look at the world with around, I mean, just because I grew up with loved ones with physical disabilities and using wheelchairs, I have a lens everywhere I go about accessibility, and I make a lot of choices in my town about where I shop and where I don't, based on whether I can get in and whether my friends can also go into that place with me with a disability. I don't know if I'm really answering your question. The other thing, though, that I wanted to comment on was that we touched on was that historical trauma piece. I know that this group has worked a lot on that trauma-informed concept, and just at face value, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have experienced huge amounts of trauma just because of societal bias and because of how our systems are set up. Because the 14C certificate that Steph referred to, it doesn't allow people to get minimum wage, it allows them to get sub-minimum wage. Some people will get less than $1 an hour for their efforts. So again, we know that there is a role, and we respect that there's providers out there who want to provide employment in those settings. We're not going to agree with their philosophy for doing that, but we continue to push for employment opportunities for people with disabilities, because they are overrepresented in unemployment. Typically, and the numbers will vary from 70 to 80% of people with disabilities broadly are unemployed. Most people don't want to be unemployed. The last thing I guess I'm going on is that there's a lot of misinformation for people who might receive disability payments or SSI or SSDI from the federal government. And so lots of people have this belief that if they go to work, they're going to lose their benefits, or they might lose their medical card that's so critical. So the work program and the Working Healthy program are statewide programs where they have benefits specialists, so people can really learn exactly what would happen if I started back to work or if I worked more, because people just opt out of trying sometimes because of all these myths and misconceptions around what would happen if they go to work.
So when you think about, employment opportunities, what ideas, what areas do you think are ripe for the picking that maybe we haven't cultivated more are enough in this community that can get our brains thinking?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, and I know there's probably other great ideas, but many people that receive HCBS services or services that come into their home are in need of people to provide care, whether they're aging or they have a disability, and the fact that it is very hard to find caregivers. And I think we're missing an entire pool of potential wonderful caregivers when we don't include people with disabilities as those potential caregivers. And so I know we've done that advocacy, we continue to work on that, but we've run into some statewide system challenges where we had to kind of challenge the state to say one person who was receiving some support services but had enough skills to be an attendant for someone on the physical disability waiver was told, oh, you can't do that because you're receiving IDD services. Well, nothing about them needing their IDD services prevented them from being able to do this other thing. It was more us having to point out that they had created a barrier that didn't need to be there. I know I'm not exactly addressing your question. It's hard because there's so much. What I will say is the goal and the vision in the disability community when it's progressive around employment is that people have jobs they want, not jobs that are just available and that someone was willing to give them the job, and that they have the opportunity for career growth. So often we have this phrase where people don't want to just work in kitchens and be greeters and do janitorial. Some people might, and for some people that's a great fit. And for many of us, some of us make choices to do jobs we don't love for the trade-off of the pay. But for so many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they get kind of pigeonholed into very narrow skill set type of jobs, and there's not a vision for where could they go and what are the unique things and their skills and abilities they bring to the employer. But I will say most employers, and we continue to work with employers, are usually blown away by how wonderful their employees are with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They're so thankful to have the job, and not every, I mean, I can't generalize to everyone, but so often you hear from employers, this has been a wonderful experience. We're thrilled. We try to highlight that. I know JobLink at Cottonwood tries to also do like an employer of the month, but there's just still a lot of barriers. We get back to plain language, there's applications, places that do online applications. If you don't have the skills or a computer at home, how are you going to apply for a job? That goes across anyone, disability, poverty, lack of access to internet. So those are, again, I just call out that this systemic poverty piece and that intersectionality of all the ways you can be struggling in our society hit people with disabilities. It's just the disability is one more thing that is part of what they're navigating in the world.
So I'm gonna, because I know he's here, he's not on camera, but I'm gonna see if Hugh, when we talk about talking to businesses in the community, do you think there might be some opportunities to set up maybe some, I don't want to say just trainings, but opportunities for a greater connection to understanding where those opportunities are? And any ideas in your head? He may be busy.
Yeah, if Hugh isn't available, we are actually at a time barrier.
We're right. Thank you.
So,
all right.
I did want to point out though that Michelle in the chat had extended an invitation for somebody to come and speak with the health equity community that they're involved with. So make sure you check the chat and see that, because that seems like a good opportunity. And I agree that it's important to get individuals from these communities at the table actually making the decisions and informing the decisions. But with that having been said, should we move on, Jill?
Do it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and introduce our next guest. So our next guest is my good friend and fellow Rotarian, Devin Kim. I was talking to her the other day about Unite Us, the platform, which all of you are probably at least a little bit familiar with, but they're having sort of a phased rollout, and we want to make sure that everybody was aware that that's still happening, and so she's going to fill you in on some of the details.
Thanks so much, Daniel. My name's Devin Kim, and I'm the CEO of Hassey & Long. And Hassey & Long also has a nonprofit arm called A Compass Project. And a Compass project works to get folks qualified for Medicaid or other programs that might help them access care, healthcare specifically. That's what my for-profit company does when we're hired by hospitals to do that. And we realized that we wanted to use our superpowers within the community when people weren't actually at an emergency level and looking for assistance in applying for Medicaid. So a Compass project provides those services. Currently, we're installed at Heartland Community Health Center for 2 hours every day, specifically to work with Heartland patients. And we've contracted with the health department, and Crystal is, I think, on the phone today and working with Crystal on some COVID dollars specifically around community resource navigation around those that have been affected by COVID, either directly or indirectly, and as a navigation analyst project. So determining how we navigate the resources that are available in our community now, and how we could do that better in the future. And so I give you all of that information as an introduction to why I'm here talking about Unite Us today. Unite Us is a software platform. It's an online tool that allows you to be able to access the different resources that are available in the community and actually make referrals to those agencies and providers within the community online using a tool, and then to be able to track those referrals. It is not Hassey and Long's tool. It is not a Compass Project's tool. It is not the health department's tool. It is a company that exists out of New York. And the Nebraska Health Information Network has a grant through HUD to provide Unite Us services for free to all community service organizations within quite a few states, including Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, and other states, doesn't matter. So we've been working on, the ball was kind of held and handed off and held and handed off. And I took the ball of Unite Us starting in March, specifically to continue to help agencies think about whether or not it makes sense to be on this platform, and to be able to both refer your clients, your patients to folks so they could be served in different ways than you can currently serve them, and also to receive referrals. So I like to talk about throwing the ball and catching the ball. And so right now, and you may have seen a presentation on Unite Us by a Unite Us person. I'm not a Unite Us person. I don't have a dog in that fight. But what I am interested in is being able to connect members of our community to the resources that they might not know how to get connected to, and to do it with so much more ease than what they're currently experiencing by knocking on doors and looking at websites and calling people. When you're talking to someone specifically that you serve, and you recognize a need that they have in our community, then you can actually gain consent from them while they're across from you at a desk or on the phone. You can gain their consent to provide a referral to anyone else on the Unite Us network. And then the folks that are on the network catch that referral. Maybe you need to get someone some housing or rental assistance, and you're not sure who to refer them to because there are multiple folks on the network that do that. You can send that referral out to all of the people that provide that service. And once it's picked up and handled by one person, the referral is kind of pulled back from all of the other agencies. So that way we know that that person is being assisted, and you can see the result of the referral. And all of this I share with you because you may have seen, like I said, a demonstration on this. You may have heard about it. There are 11 agencies currently on Unite Us on the network. I'd be happy to share my screen with you, but I don't think that's what's really important. I think it's important for you to know that there's someone locally, and there are 11 agencies currently on the network. And if you want to know more about it, I'm more than happy to, you can set up a time with me. I'll drop my information in the chat. You can set up a time with me to Zoom and go over that. You can also, all you have to do is fill out a partner registration form online to be able to register your services, to be able to be referred to, or yourself to be able to refer others to that are on the network. So so I'm like I said, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about Unite Us, or maybe if you've had some confusion around what it is and how to use it. I'm more than happy to answer those questions right now. I have 3 minutes.
Yeah, there's a nice, Megan put something in the chat saying senior resource centers been part of multiple United referrals, and so far it's worked well for them. So that's great.
Thanks, Megan. Well, I just dropped my email into the chat, and that's probably the best way to reach out to me. So so feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and basically if there's, and it looks like Rich is using, I do know Rich is using Unite Us as well. So if you are on the network and there are other people you wish were on the network, let me know. What we're doing is really trying to make sure that your network of referrals are available if it's something that you're using. It definitely, you have to enter a little bit of information on the people that you're helping, but it automates the referral process in a way that's very difficult to duplicate in the amount of time that it takes without the network. So I would give it that plug. Also, there's an entire component built into Unite Us for sensitive organizations. So if you are providing sensitive services that no one else should know about, you can still do that, receive referrals and push out referrals on the network, and that information is kept separate. But this is a person-centric referral system that allows you to see the other services that someone has already received in the community, which is very helpful as we try and wrap our arms around our community residents and make sure that they're getting the services that they need.
Thank you, Devin. I do have one question. Is there there's not like a timeline. So if individuals aren't on the network and they're interested in joining, what will you say to them, or as far as a outlook as to when, like, maybe this will be a community wide and everybody will be involved?
Right. I think the end goal is to be able to have a network that everyone is using to manage all their referrals, because then we're best serving our community residents by being able to see the services that they're receiving and how to better serve them when they're not receiving services. And so if at any point you want to get on Unite Us, that's great. I'm not out here pushing you to hop on, but if it sounds like it makes sense for you, now you'll know what it is when someone says, "Hey, I'm using Unite Us. Are you on there?" Now you'll know what that means, and perhaps it might make sense for you to be a part of the network.
I just want to share a little anecdotally. One of the seniors that we used it for to make a referral when my staff person here, Larry, was putting it together, and he is kind of explaining to her why he was asking for her consent for her to be part of the network. And he kind of explained what we were doing. She commented how, she said, that's just really amazing and really refreshing to hear that the different nonprofits and social service agencies are communicating together and working together as a team. And so that was just very gratifying.
Thanks, Megan.
Great. So I don't think there's any other questions. And again, we are a little bit past 2:30 now. I think people might be starting to drop off. So yeah, thanks, Devin. And people can follow up with you by email if they have any other questions or concerns. So Jill, do you have anything else to say, or should we wrap things
Could
up?
I put in a quick plug?
Yes, you may.
Just because we have a unique opportunity here at the ARC, we are partnered with the Kansas Leadership Center and the state of Kansas regarding COVID vaccines and how to incentivize people to get vaccines that are currently not choosing to get vaccinated. We have the opportunity to set up calls with anybody, any group, like a group that's your faith group, your agency, and the goal of the call is to make a plan for how you could do something in our community or your community, wherever you're at. We'll be doing it statewide to incentivize vaccinations. And there's up to $2,000 available. So after the call, if your plan and needs money, then we're able to help submit that to KLC and you'll get a check for $2,000. As an example, one of the stills in Southeast Kansas is having picnics. And at every picnic, they're offering an incentive to be in a drawing, and you'll get $100 if you got vaccinated. So there's all kinds of creative ways. There's nothing that you couldn't propose. If you're interested, reach out to me or Steph, and we will work on getting that those calls set up.
Neat. And if you want to send me that information, I can just send it out to the whole group for people who might have already dropped off the meeting.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. We will do that.
I'm
Sorry.
the essence because we have to be done by August 1st with these actions.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Yeah.